Hello, everyone, and welcome to. This is not Britain's Hangout Hour, but this is a first real discussion of the year talking about a specific book. I put it up to vote because I don't know. I like torturing myself, I guess. Um, I one of the things I wanted to do was maybe record a video where I did a skit. I have some of my friends who are Malazan fans come on my channel and harass me until finally I'm like, you know what? Fine, I'll read Gardens of the Moon. But no, my audience didn't want that. They're like, no, talk to some friends who have read Malazan. So we're here. It took about
Yeah.
5 months to put this together, but I'm here now. Welcome, everyone. So, yeah, I have two big fans of Malazan here. My good friend Shaye from Zachary Shaye, and of course, Raf from Raf Blutaxt. Who, if I remember, Raf, you actually started your whole channel kind of talking about Malazan predominantly.
Yeah, that's how I started the whole thing because I was on the Unabridged Burners Discord. That was this Discord that belongs to Iska Jarak's YouTube channel, and he had this challenge of going like, "Hey, can you make a video, spoiler-free, summary, introduction, whatever, to Malazan, explaining what Malazan is all about and make it spoiler-free?" And I was like, "Sure, I can do that," and I made a video, and that's kind of how the whole thing started.
Yeah, and also we would have had Philip Chase here, but he got sick. So get to feeling better, Philip. Hope you're doing well. I'm sure I'll have him on this channel at some point again in the future for something or another. But today we're talking about Gardens of the Moon from Malazan, however you pronounce it. I know Steven Erickson, the author, doesn't really care all that much, so I just call it Malazan. Which I imagine a lot of people are very excited for me to read this. And I did talk with a couple people. Like I was talking with Raf, one of them, and Shay and I were actually talking about Malzahn the other day. So it was kind of funny because we were having this conversation. I'm like, "How's this sound?" You're like, "Okay, cool." And then I'm like, "I don't know, it just feels kind of rough." And you're like, "Oh man, read Dead House Gates," and I will read Dead House Gates. But anyway, enough of me yapping. How are you guys doing this fine afternoon/evening?
Well, I've spent the entire day rereading Gardens of the Moon.
Of course, because you can just crank them out, man.
Well, I mean, this is my fourth reading of the book, so I felt that I could just refresh my memory a bit.
You know what's funny? Shay was just talking to me. He's like, "Yo, I was starting to reread with some friends, and
Yeah.
he just like he
So it's
just
supposed to be like a reread along that we were gonna do like all 10 of them, and I tapped out halfway through Gardens. Well, so I was reading Gardens, I was about 60% of the way done, and they were pumping the brakes on it. And then by the time one of them came back around, it's like, okay, let's finish Gardens. I'm like, I'm already on to other stuff. I don't have it in me to do a 10-book reread, but I definitely will at some point. I definitely want to reread at least the Books of the Fallen and the novels of the Malazan Empire at some point, but not now.
yeah. Well, Malazan was something a lot of my friends were getting after me to read for a long time. One of my good friends, his name's Ty. He's not on BookTube or anything, but he's a massive fan of Malazan. He's always been telling me about it, and a bunch of other people. Since I talk about fantasy on BookTube, a lot of people are like, "Have you heard, my dear friend, of Malazan or Malazan?" And
You
I'm
heard the
just
good word?
yeah, I'm just like, yeah. I'm always hesitant to read like big series, like Wheel of Time or Malazan. I'm sure I've offended the Malazan fan base already because I've mentioned those two series adjacently to each other, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, this show, I was hoping you two would at least gaslight me a little bit into reading more Malazan because I have some very conflicted feelings about Guards of the Moon. I thought we could talk about it today.
Yeah, I mean, you have to technically go at least all the way until Memories of Ice, because that's the one where Whiskey Jack basically runs a basically runs a bar, sort of.
That does sound like something he would do, honestly.
It's
And
it's one of those really funny bits on the side where he is constantly like like 3 or 4 times throughout the story, some other character, hey, let's go to my tent. I have a keg of Grenfallen ale, and when they have to have like a sort of like serious conversation, and it's always the same sort of like opening line, like, hey, come to my tent. I have this cold. Let's do that. So speaking of beer, cheers,
Yeah,
everybody.
let's go. Yeah, but yeah, Gardens of the Moon. I finally read it last year.
So before we start getting into that stuff, how are we going to do this about spoilers and spoiler free things?
I thought maybe we could talk spoiler free for maybe I don't know, a couple minutes, and then just kind of go into it because I didn't really want to beat around too much.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I'll try to keep it spoilers limited to Gardens of the Moon, because that's of course the other danger with the Malazan Book of the Fallen stuff, that you go like, oh, but this is because of this thing that happens in book 10.
Yeah, I remember, Raf, you told me when I was reading this, because you were one of my sounding boards where I was going like, what is this? And I'm like, and you were like, oh, there's a moment that kind of foreshadows the whole series, what it's about. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Yeah. And then you were like, oh, don't even bother looking for it because you're not gonna know it. I'm like, okay. But I still look for it anyway.
Yeah, it only makes sense afterwards. So you might remember it when you get to the point where it is revealed and you're like, oh, that's what this was about. But yeah.
Just for some background, what finally convinced me to read this, and I've said this a couple times on my channel, but what finally convinced me to read Malazan, for one thing, was that it's an epic fantasy that wasn't quite as touched by the Tolkien model of fantasy storytelling. I know that Erickson has written about this. He's a big fan of like Robert E. Howard and Fritz Leiber and Glenn Cook. So I'm like, an epic fantasy that isn't, like Tolkien touched, which, don't get me wrong, there are some Tolkien-inspired fantasies that I enjoy quite a bit. But I do find it interesting when someone tries something that's just completely divorced from that, and that isn't like Baz Lag, which is just a whole other, type of fantasy entirely. I call it the anti-Middle-earth, really. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But that's really what finally kind of pushed me over the edge. Like, okay, I think there could be something interesting here. And I was warned that that Gardens of the Moon can divide some people, and I will admit there were some times. I don't know if you saw my a recent video of mine, but my friend Alex on his channel will sometimes, he has his intro. He'll throw a book across the room and it hits the wall. Yeah. That was me sometimes with Gardens of the Moon. I didn't do it. I finished it because Krupp was great. And then I was like, oh man, Krupp was really good, really saved this book for me. And then I think it was Raf or somebody who's like, oh, well, he doesn't arrive again until the third book. I'm like, you fucking asshole. Fuck. But yeah.
I mean, we'll I guess we'll get to the points that made you almost throw the book at some point. Because I'm interested in what made you be angry at the book.
Well, I mean, we'll get to it, but yeah, no, yeah. But kind of going back to, yeah, it was that non-Tolkien-ness that interested me. What finally was like, okay, I'll give this a crack, even though it's 10 books. I generally don't love the big epics, but you know what? I'll give you a try, and I did, and we're here now.
Right. It's interesting what you said about him taking inspiration from Howard, because Malazan, like, I feel like all the books feel very vignette style if you pare it back.
Yeah, you started reading the Conan, the Del Rey Conans recently, haven't you? Or you got them recently, didn't you?
So I started them. This is my first Howard journey. I hadn't read any Robert E. Howard before this, and I started them like 2 weeks ago, and so far I'm really enjoying it.
The Del Rey trilogy, the Coming of Conan, Bloody Crown, and Conquering Sword collection.
Yeah, correct. Those are the ones I always recommend to people. Cause
yeah, that's to me, that's the best edition that you can get. They're really good with like the introductions and the additional stuff at the end and so forth. They're really good.
And I love the artwork. It's pretty awesome.
I'm quite partial to Gary Gianni myself, but the guy they got for the first one's quite good. So I think he did the second Conan one. I don't remember, but anyway. Which is fun. I know he said he liked Lieber, and it was kind of interesting because there were parts with like Krupp and the gang where they're just kind of sitting around and drinking, and that kind of made me think of like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser because a lot of the Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories are just Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser either sitting around drinking, getting into trouble, or chasing tail. There wasn't as much chasing tail in this, but it did happen a little bit.
To be fair, I think what where the Fritz Leiber Fafhrd and Grey Mouser thing comes through, and that is more in later ones than in this first novel, is the male friendship thing. Like he has a couple of like very iconic like duos in this in the 10 books that are very much sort of like versions of the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser duo of like two like very like big French long ongoing male friendships. That's definitely something that you can see reflected and going on there. There's, as I said, there's a couple of those in later books. I don't want to bring them up because they might spoil stuff that happens in the first book in one way or another. But obviously Kalam and Big Quick Ben are basically one of those couples, so to speak. And there's others.
Yeah.
And yes, the drinking.
If we're talking about Gardens of the Moon, there's Fiddler and Hedge, which is kind of hinted at. Like they reference a long-going friendship, but you don't see it as much.
Yeah, exactly. Fiddler and Hedge, definitely one of those duos. There's later ones, of course, and that's like one of the like difficulties with Gardens of the Moon is that unlike later novels in Malazan Book of the Fallen, there's a lot of stuff that you just have to accept because all of that stuff happens before the novel. Like the legendary status of the Bridge Burners, for example, is one of those things where you're like, yeah, but we don't see the Bridge Burners do anything epic here.
Yeah, they're basically
all of the stuff happened before the book.
They're basically doing like a clandestine, like terrorist kind of activity in this book.
Yeah. Infiltration.
And yeah, You know what? That's better. I'm trying to find the girl's name, the teenage girl at the beginning. Her name's
Sorry.
Like Sorry. Yeah, I'm like it's Shy or Sorry or something. I can't remember. But,
it is Sorry.
It is Sorry. Yeah, she was. She's in here, but I said this a couple times. This is epic. Like, don't make it capital E epic. Like. Not a joke. Though I don't think it's that difficult to read. Like, I mostly understood what was going on. I mean, there were some parts where I'm like, you could give some more context a little bit if you wanted to, but you know what? I'll just go with it here. But I do think that this book being, this series being kind of hard was, at least from my limited experience, is a bit overstated so far.
I would agree.
That was one of the things I was kind of hesitant about. Like, oh man, you got to get to like book 3, and I'm just like, oh god, like I don't know if I have that commitment, man. And then they're like, oh no, dinosaur hands. And I'm like, you know what, maybe. You know what, okay.
Like, I really don't think you have to give it till Memories of Ice though, because Deadhouse Gates is like probably in my top 5, if not my top 3 from the main Book of the Fallen 10. I like Deadhouse Gates more than Memories of Ice, honestly.
Personally, yeah, probably me too. I think what is interesting is the I mean, there's that whole thing that Erickson basically wanted to continue with Memories of Ice, but his computer got stolen, so he lost a part of the manuscript. So he wrote the other one first, and then went back to Memories of Ice, which is why those two take place at the same time. And there's some stuff around and that there's like cross reference between the two novels where something that happens in Deadhouse Gate is referenced in Memories of Ice, and vice versa. So and what I find interesting is that both are sort of foreshadowed in Gardens of the Moon, and that's something I picked up only on like the second or third reading, where there's a mention that soldiers from 7 cities are sent all over the Empire these days, but not to Dujak's host. So Dujak's hosts won't learn that their home country, because his army is mostly people from 7 cities, right? That their homeland is very close to a rebellion, which is of course what's happening in Deadhouse Gates. And there's another thing in Daruzistan where they're looking at the market goods, what kind of stuff is imported into into the Ruzistan and where it comes from, and the mention that like a couple of cities have just been taken over by the Panyan Seer and the Panyan Doman, which is obviously the topic of Memories of Ice. So he does foreshadow what is happening next.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, well, like I said, I think I think the hard to read bit that some people have said in the past is a bit overstated, but I can see how some people might get confused because there is a lot going on in this book. I remember there were a couple times I'm like, wait a minute, what? And we'll get to that. 'Cause I was like,
but like let's structure it, and let's start with like what were your first impressions of reading like this book in general, Britain? Like that, I'd be interested in like what was your first impression of going through this whole thing? Like,
well, my first impression was this isn't that hard, to be honest with you. For one, that was kind of one of my first ones. But I also was reading it, and I'm just kind of like, huh, this kind of reminds me a little bit of like not quite as weird, but just as gothic as like Elric. I got like an Elric vibe, even though I've known that like. I think Esselmont's more of an Elric guy than Erickson. I know Erickson said he hasn't read Elric until not too long ago. Then Animander Rake shows up, and you're like, he seems a bit Elric-y. Basically, like anti-Elric. He's just black instead of white. That sounded weird.
That's the point.
I'm sorry.
That's what it's like. Erickson came up with Animander Rake as a character, but Esselmont came up with the sword, I think. So that's the trick there.
Mm.
And there's like a famous scene at like a convention somewhere where they're talking about that, and Erickson goes like, I didn't know about Elric at the time, and Esselmont just like sits next to him and goes like, well, but I did. Which is just generally funny.
Yeah, but I guess my impression was more like, okay, let's see what you got, basically, and it definitely did. I was kind of reading it, and I was like, okay, yeah, I see some little details here. I didn't realize until and this is like pretty early on, so I won't say it's like a spoiler. I didn't realize, actually, I'll hold off on that. But yeah, I for initial thoughts, like, I really appreciated the ambition that Erickson was going for here. I do remember that. I enjoyed that he just went for it. It kind of reminded me of when I don't think it's quite as good as like, Perdido Street Station, but I do think there is that similar kind of mad ambition in Gardens of the Moon. I did appreciate that quite a bit.
Yeah.
I do think book 2 is even more ambitious, but it kind of tells a more cohesive story than Gardens. I mean, Gardens had a lot to like sprinkle in there and hint. Like, there's a lot of foreshadowing to stuff that doesn't even really come to fruition until Toll the Hounds. Like,
I was about to say, we'll get to that type of stuff in a minute, but keep going, Shay.
But like, I think that's where that book could kind of struggle a little bit. Like, I love Gardens of the Moon. It's like a 4 out of 5 for me, but it's on the lower end of the Malazan books. And I think that's because it was setting up so many things, and kind of everyone says like it starts you smack dab in the middle of the action, but it kind of does serve to fill you in on these characters' backgrounds a lot in a way that the later books do not, aside from maybe like Midnight Tides.
And I think you're right. And I think it's partly because of the somewhat weird structure of this novel. And that I think is partly because of the history, right? Like, because originally Erickson wrote a movie script around the parts in the Resistance, around the crew around the Phoenix Inn, right? Crupper and Crocus and Marillion, those kind of people, right? So he wrote that as a movie script. That is a coherent story in itself. But if you are then turning this into like the first part of your epic fantasy series, you kind of also need to introduce the bridge burners and all of those characters that will be around for the entire fucking thing. And that's why there is sort of like that stuff in Pale that really feels sort of like disconnected from the events in the Ruzistan, and generally like the bridge burners, Fiddler, Hedge, Whiskey Jack, that gang. They don't actually have that much to do once the action moves to the Ruzistan, right? So I feel that's like why this book sometimes feels a bit off structure-wise, sort of like unbalanced, is because it is basically two stories that have been sort of like forced into like one novel in a way. You know what I mean?
Did you notice? I want to know if y'all have similar feelings about this, but you talking about how it was a movie script and then how he had to add elements,
Yeah.
like the bridge burners, got me thinking. One thing that bugged me, I didn't realize until we were talking right now, is that I think Crocus and Paran Genois, they
Hmm.
both kind of have the same sort of like young guy, not really knowing what the world is like. Like their perspectives felt very similar, and they're both kind of introducing their plot elements, being the Phoenix in crowd, and then
Yeah.
Genois being the bridge burners. And neither of them really worked for me that much in Gardens, but I like Genos a lot more post book one. But that was one thing I struggled with is like we kind of have
Hmm.
these two protagonists that feel very similar, and a lot of the characters around them are far more interesting, like Krupp, like Whiskey Jack.
Yeah. I see what you mean. I think it kind of depends what kind of reader you are. I feel they can be like a really good sort of like introductory character if you're like unexperienced with fantasy in general, or you are the kind of fantasy reader that really cares about world building details and stuff. They can be sort of like the character to latch onto because they have a lot of stuff explained to them
Right.
in one way or another, so you can learn the world through their eyes. And I mean, they're as close as you get to the to the farm boy to hero kind of trajectory that so many people know from like a lot of like classic fantasy.
Mhm.
Obviously, both of them are not that, but I think
They
they're
do
as
kind of
close
serve
to that.
that role in the first book at least.
Yeah, I mean, it changes definitely a lot, both for both over time. Ganos more drastically, I think, than uh, with Crocus. Plus, you obviously have the whole like spoiler, that whole thing that happens to Ganos once he arrives in Pale, and you're like, oh wait, did you just did you just kill like the one character I thought was going to be the protagonist? But obviously, stuff moves from there into different directions. But
Mhm.
Yeah, it's I also but as I went on, there were just some things like I'll get more into it as we get into the spoiler section that I was just kind of like I don't know what this is, but it's interesting you brought up about the movie script because like I
mhm.
was asking some other people this. I'm like, how the hell was that going to be a movie? Like I that's the thing. If they ever did make it into a movie, like
But
even
you
now
can
I don't.
you can do that pretty well, I think, if you strip out the whole like Malazan context and you basically have it as a sort of like comedy heist kind of situation around the Phoenix Inn with a focus on the
Right.
sort of like Lady Simtal intrigue kind of stuff, and this group of friends that want to get their buddy back into power, or at least
Right.
back into his possessions and stuff like that. If you focus on that, and at the same time you have the love story around Crocus trying to, well, not love story, but like Crocus maybe having a bit of a crush on that girl that he stole stuff from. You
I
can
thought that
you
was
can if you
Sorry at first. I'll be
no
honest
no
with
no
you guys.
well,
I'm like, oh, this poor bastard. He's
I mean, that's who he ends up with at the end, but but you can
Spoilers.
have
yeah,
like
no, it's funny. It's
you
just
can
like
have that whole, if you focus on that
I
just
think
in the
especially
fantasy
when
state,
you
you can have a pretty good movie that is close to your gang of thieves and ne'er wells around that inn
okay, yeah,
having
I'll
adventures
see
in the
that. I
fantasy
guess I was
city.
just thinking about this whole book as like a whole. I was just like, oh my
No,
god,
no,
how
no,
would they
no.
make
That's
that into a movie?
that was exactly my point. It's the Phoenix Inn stuff is the movie script, and the stuff around the Siege of Pale and the Malazan military stuff. That's the stuff that he has to put into the first novel to make the whole series do well, and that's why it feels disjointed, because you have that already well developed stuff in Daruzistan, and then the other stuff that doesn't necessarily fit in tone has to be somehow tied into this, and that's where I see some sort of cracks in the novel sometimes, where it's like, yeah, well, you have everyone being somewhat more lighthearted and so forth into Rujistan, and then you have like world-ending weapons of mass destruction, weapons
Mhm.
of moon destruction, and so forth going on there in Siege of Pale, and freeing of Race the Tyrant and all of that kind of stuff. Suddenly, those don't necessarily always fit too well together in the first novel. You kind of get used to it by after a while, but there is a sense of humor and comedy in Malazan that sometimes sticks out compared to the seriousness of some of the other scenes in there. But yeah, that's what I meant. It's like the movie script was a like one specific part of the novel, not all of it.
Okay, that makes a lot
I
more
can definitely
sense
see
because
in like the in the Ralik Nom scenes where he's
Yeah.
got like his crossbow and stuff. I remember thinking like this feels like a film.
Yeah.
Baruch, whenever
Mhm.
he first comes into contact with Animander, that felt very like theatrical in a way that felt like it
Yeah.
was a film script. But I would say,
Yeah.
yeah, all the Malazan Marine stuff didn't really feel film scripty to me.
No. No, it definitely doesn't, and that's what I meant. Like that, it feels a bit more disjointed compared to later novels, where you don't have to sort of like rework that older material into something of a novel.
Yeah, I was about to say this was like his first kind of novel, wasn't it? I don't know, but
His first fantasy novel.
oh,
Like he wrote some novels, some magical realism stuff previously under his name of Stephen London. The River Awakens, I think, is the one that is most easily available still. I haven't read it because it's still kind of hard to get, but that's something he published earlier than that.
yeah, no, I knew he'd like written some other stuff, but yeah, I mean, I don't really know if I have anything else to say aside from that in terms of like spoiler-free level stuff. Because a lot of my issues with the book are kind of like specific. So I mean, I'm just kind of, I just feel I don't want to feel like I'm dancing around here. But I appreciate the ambition that Erickson was going for, but there were just some things that really held it back for me. Though I hear a lot of that gets cleared up in Dead House Gates, so I'll try Dead House Gates and see if that pays off.
It's a much darker novel.
I've heard that. Yeah, I heard it gets real sad. So that's what I'm told.
One thing that is important to notice is that there are a lot of like interesting bits, and I don't know if you picked up on them on the first read. For example, the epigraphs over each chapter, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are important in some ways. They often give some context, but also a lot of them are written by characters of the novel. For example, there's a whole thing about stuff written by Tuck the Younger, whom you have met.
That's. Oh, we'll get to that. Yeah, no.
For example, and there is a piece of work called Call to Shadow by Felicin.
She's in the book. That's right. Interesting.
Well, there's several Felicins. That's kind of the problem there.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah. Anyway,
it's a generational kind of thing in with names and stuff. But yeah,
I will get this out of the way real quick. As a fan of the Dark Tower, I can understand the frustration with trying to sell this series because a lot of people read the Gunslinger and they're like, "What the hell is that?" And I've seen a lot of similar reactions to Gardens of the Moon. So you know what? I understand now. I see where you're going. I see where you're coming from. Because I'm also that guy with the Dark Tower. I'm always telling people, okay, you can read the Gunslinger. It's a really fun, it's a really interesting book. It's a fever dream of a book. But when like it gets like to book 2, like it's where it really takes off. But I think there are some differences though. I think this is far more complicated.
Yes,
than
with
the
difference that the Dark Tower goes downhill after the Gunslinger.
I haven't read. I kind of bounced off the Gunslinger, to be honest.
I really enjoyed the Gunslinger because it has
offended.
All the. I love the biblical language in the Gunslinger, and after that, it kind of gets just boring.
Yeah, I know you're not a big Stephen King fan, but my point being, I understand the frustration that some people might have when recommending Gardens of the Moon. Like, I was talking with my friend Tig a lot during this, and he's like, yeah, this first book's a bit rough at parts. And I'm like, I see that. So, yeah.
But I also, at the same time, like, I think book 2 is drastically better, but I also think, like, it's still an Erickson book. So I'm interested to see what you think of Dead House Gates, but I don't think it is a complete like 180 from book one. Like I know a lot of
No.
people when I wasn't loving like Eye of the World, they're like, "Oh, give it to book 4 of Wheel of Time." And I did, and I'm like, "This is the same stuff I didn't like." And like in that fashion, like this is not
No.
gonna switch up the formula. It's still the same stuff from Gardens of the Moon. It's just a little bit more distilled. And I like Raf mentioned, it's not being adapted from a screenplay, so it may be a little bit more cohesive in those aspects. But like I gave Gardens like a 4-star, and then Dead House Gates was just a step above 5-star. Boom! Like it was like the difference between like an 8 out of 10 and a 10 out of 10. So I can't completely speak for someone that is feeling more middle of the road for the book as a whole because I was generally positive on Gardens.
Me too. I think there's an interesting thing going on there with the Gardens of the Moon thing and the oh no, it series ever written kind of stuff, and that's more like a fandom kind of discourse, right? Where no, Malazan Book of the Fallen is not a particularly hard book to read or series to read. It is a series that it requires some reading stamina because it's a lot of like big books and
There's a lot going on. I'm not saying like it's. I'm not
no, no,
saying
no.
like
But like
it's.
the thing is, if you have a moderately sized vocabulary, and obviously if English is not your first language, then stuff gets obviously more difficult, definitely. But like if you have the ability to read a bunch of like 1,000-page novels, and not everyone has that sort of like stamina, right? If you have that though, the Malazan Book of the Fallen is not exactly a difficult read in any way or form. But because fandoms are weird and people need to have something to sort of like make their thing the best thing ever, the Malazan fandom is very much sort of like has turned this into this like supposedly most difficult thing ever. Where if you read Malazan and you like it, you're a smart person. If you don't like it, you're probably too dumb to understand it, which is bullshit. Let's be clear, this is bullshit. But it is
I was about
certainly
to say,
sort of
didn't you
like
make
a
a whole video
Malazan.
about that?
I mean, yeah, definitely. But there is that dynamic, and you have the same thing going on with some other series. Obviously, Gene Wolfe is similar. Like people go, like, if you don't understand Book of the New Sun, or if you don't like Book of the New Sun, you probably didn't understand it, so you're not as smart as us who totally love it. Because if you understand it, then you will love it. It's like, no, you can understand Book of the New Sun and still think it's bad. That is possible. But so there's that, and the same way you have something going on there where the Malazan fandom goes like, well, Guardians of the Moon, really bad. The rest, really good. Because obviously Guardians of the Moon is the book that everyone encounters first. And it's weird because Guardians of the Moon is a very good book. It is less, I mean, it's shorter than than any other book in the series. And it does have those sort of like difficult sort of like problems to tackle, like a lot of like obstacles to overcome in general. So it can be kind of hard to do that, but it's the first time anyone encounters like the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and that means that everything after that, once you've gotten used to what Erickson is doing, will be easier and thus feel better in a way. And I think that's partly the problem there as well, where people sort of needlessly put Gardens of the Moon down for unrelated reasons that have nothing to do with the actual quality of the book, but more with the reading experience of going through like 10 books and getting more and more used to the language and to the style and to the structure and so forth. And that kind of stuff. The same way that you'd have like all the what's the phrase? All the Robin Hobb fans go like, well, clearly Realm of the Elderlings is the best thing ever written in epic fantasy. But the Rainwild Chronicles are the worst thing ever written in fantasy. It's like, both things don't necessarily are true, and you're kind of going overboard with this whole thing. So I
It
feel like
is. I
Gardens of
do think Rain Wilds is for sure her weakest, but it's like definitely super overemphasized
yeah,
that it's bad. I think it is the weakest, but not by like a massive margin. And anyone who's read them all will say like, "Oh, just got to get through Rain Wilds." Like it's kind of like an overstated thing at this point, like how
yeah, the same way that
terrible
everyone
Rain Wilds
in
is.
Malazan goes like, well, you got to get through Gardens of the Moon and then it will get good. It's like that's very much like a social dynamic within the fandom that has very little to do with the actual quality of the novels. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there might be some people like, can I just go to Dead House Gates? And then it's like, no. There were some people, because I like Conan so much, it's like, oh, maybe you should read like the prologue, the book 4 because you like Conan so much, and I'm like, I'm a real It's funny, I was talking about this last night. I'm like, I'm a real chronology guy, so I kind of have to start with Gardens of the Moon. So, yeah, that
They're
is
saying
tempting,
like you
though.
should start with the beginning of House of Chains.
Yeah.
Wait, where were they saying you should start?
Yeah, exactly. The Carson
Beginning
game.
of House of Chains.
Yeah, that's not a good move.
I think you were one of the people. Well, one, I wasn't gonna do that anyway, and two, Ref like immediately talked me out of it.
No, it's I don't think it's a good idea. In
Yeah, read
general,
them in the order they got published. I think if there was anyone to read like separated from the series, I think Midnight Tides works pretty well as a
yes,
solo novel. But like, it's even better if you've read the 4 books. Like,
yeah,
get all that talk of reading them in different orders out of here.
No,
He numbered them for you. You don't got to think about it.
yeah, no, but yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about it for like spoiler free level of discussion. So I guess we should just jump in here.
yeah, definitely.
Tattersail dies.
Yeah,
No,
no.
okay.
Yeah, no, then you
Well, I
hear.
mean, Gano's parent dies, and then he gets back from the dead. That's like in chapter 2.
Yeah, no, this is the time where you two kind of stare at me and go, okay, so what didn't you like about it? I'm like,
Yeah.
so
Yes.
yeah, no, well, where do I start when like talking about this? Because again,
Oh, wait, before you talk about like when you say there are things you didn't like where are you sitting at on a scale from 1 to 10? Because I say it's one of my least favorite Malazan books, but
I'd
it's
say
like
it's
an
like
8.
a 5, like
Oh.
a 5 out of 10, like.
Oh, what? A 5?
Or like
I
a
thought you were...
or like a 3 out of 5, like a light 3 out of 5. Let me get into it.
So a 6 out of 10? I
Like maybe
guess that's
5
workable.
maybe 5 point. I don't know, but anyway, it.
So so here's the thing: like, what exactly are the things that you didn't like? Because that's just like something I'm genuinely curious. Because so many people, not just you, not just like about Malazan in general, like I didn't like this book. It's like, so can you explain why? Is this like a personal taste thing?
I
Is
mean,
this like a how?
Well, I
You know?
mean, obviously, it's probably a personal taste thing, but I mean, what isn't? But I mean, just to get my head straight here, like I said, like I don't think it's that complicated of a read. You can follow the story pretty coherently for the most part.
Yeah.
But I can see people getting thrown off by all the stuff that's going on and all the characters who show up, because I definitely did a couple times. I had to look through the nice glossary that Erickson was very kind enough to provide at the beginning of the book here.
Yeah.
But the dramatis personae here, I can't find it. Anyway, what annoyed me about this book? Okay, one I'll just get into now. One of the things that really bothered me is I kept calling them tonal inconsistencies because that was just the best way I could describe it. Because I was starting the book, I'm like, okay, so it's kind of this like dark, macabre kind of like. I don't want to compare it straight to Elric. I think there's a lot of differences there, but very Elric-y on the side of like dark fantasy. Okay, I can work with this. And then it's like, okay, so there's a bunch of soldiers sitting around. They're talking about what's going on. And they're like, okay, we're gonna go to this place. It's called Moonspawn, and we're gonna go track into the building and find this guy called Animander Rake. And I'm like, okay, yeah, all right, I got this. Then like 5 minutes later, they're riding up on Moonspawn, and and they're just start flinging fucking magic beams at you. And I'm like, hold on a minute, just turned into a D&D battle, which I know this started as a D&D campaign. Well, GURPS campaign, technically, so I mean, I got that. But I was kind of like, what is going on here? This was not set up. Like...
But here's the thing, Brett. If that's what you thought while reading it, you weren't paying attention, because no one, and I just reread this earlier this morning, right? No one ever talks about entering Moonspawn and finding Animander Rake. That is never an option that is discussed.
Or I guess I got the sense that there was going to be like this big like showdown confrontation. So maybe it's just my expectations here, but and then it just happens, and you're like, okay, or maybe he attacks for. Again, it's been like 5 months since I read this, so my
Mhm.
memory is a little rusty.
I think
I
so.
will say, oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, you go ahead.
What you're saying about the disparate tone, I remember having a similar thought, like, okay, this series is dark. And I think a lot of that was like I read it when I was pretty young. And for me, this was like really dark. But on a reread, I realized like even when you have stuff like the possession of Sorry of the Fisher's daughter,
Mhm.
That
Shadow
was well
Throne and
done. I like
Cotillion,
that part.
like they were joking back and forth, and even then they talk about like sparing her soul. So that it shows that even these dastardly seeming guys have some heart to them, and they are joking back and forth with one another. They do have a banter. So I think me going into it, the image I had of the books in my mind was a lot darker than it was. That being said, it does have extremely dark moments, but in terms of like it having, I wouldn't even call it a disparate tone, but it does play with being like, okay, this is a really dark, like nihilistic seeming thing that happens, and then there's a lot of levity, and that's throughout like all the books.
Yeah, it has all of these registers. I agree. Um, yeah, talk about a friend duo, Shadow Throne and Cotillion,
Yeah,
man.
no, it was funny after I was kind of going around and then somebody, I forget who it was, maybe it was Raf actually, and they're like, "Oh, so did you figure out who they were?" And I'm like, "No." It's like,
I didn't
"No,
until
it's the Emperor and his like best friend." I'm like, "Are you fucking serious? Like, come on."
I didn't realize until they tell you in Dead House Gates, but I was talking to my girlfriend about it, and I'm like, so there's this character Dancer, but there's this other character called Cotillion, and she goes,
And
"Do
yeah,
you know what
if you know what a
Cotillion?"
cotillion is, then you get it
It's a
immediately.
dance. Like if I'd known what that word was, I feel like I would
Yeah,
have connected that sooner. But if you don't know what the word cotillion is, I just thought
I
made
have
up
no
fantasy
idea.
name.
I didn't have a clue what that word meant, so I was just kind of like, "Oh, okay, that's
She's like, the cotillion guy's obviously the dancer guy. I'm like, well,
yeah.
shit. Took
yeah."
me a whole book to figure that out.
But like, yeah, there were
But
just I'll say
there are
this.
all these
Oh, sorry.
hints, right? When it's like, well, the Shadow Realm showed up immediately after the fall of the Emperor, and it seems to have like a personal vendetta against the Empire ever since. And we're like, well, hmm,
Yeah, and there was
what
just
could possibly be the case here?
And then there was just stuff like that. Like, what's fun? Like, it was really fun to like talk about this book to people and just like explaining
Yeah.
my thoughts. Like, what is this? Like, especially when like I was talking with Tabitha and Sherilyn on my podcast a few months ago, and I was telling them all about Gardens of the Moon. I was trying not to spoil it, but I was basically giving them like the gist of what was going on. I'm like, okay, so there's this guy. He's called Hairlock, and he's like this like rotting corpse basically. He's one of those like super magically powered dudes that like he won't die. But then he turns into a puppet, and like you're like, that sounds a little silly, but he like actually like wrecks a bunch of shit throughout the whole book, and you're like, oh, okay. It was just stuff like that where I was just kind of like,
Look, he's a scary puppy. There's a puppet. There's a long history of
scary
scary
puppy.
puppets. So
He's
now
a
those are
joke.
usually skinny puppies. No, he's a scary marionette, and there's a long history of scary marionettes in like culture.
Oh,
You know,
sure. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't. I was just kind of like, all right. And
okay. Let's back up a moment because I think there's something where I feel like lose it with Malazan, and that is the structure, right? Erickson
yeah.
has a very sort of like distinct style, the famous elliptical style for chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And the Siege of Pale is like a prime example of that because you know where it starts, right? It starts with the whole scene of Tattersail on the hill, looking at the destruction and everything. And then it flashes back to the beginning where she wakes up with her lover and goes like, shit, we have to go to the meeting. And then they have the meeting about like the attack. And then you go through that attack. And then you end up back at the moment where the chapter starts, which is with the bridge burners showing up and transferring Hairlock's soul from his dying body into the puppet.
Mhm.
And I think that often like throws a lot of people off who are used to doing to fantasy being written linearly in a completely linear way, where you start at the beginning and you end at the end. It's like no, these are usually in circles. You start at the end, and then you kind of go back to the beginning and see how you ended up where this whole chapter starts. And I think that's one of those things where Erickson shows sort of like his specific approach to writing, his relatively unique voice, not generally unique, but unique in fantasy, because it's certainly
I guess what I
the
was
style
trying
of chapter I've encountered in a lot of like postmodern literature. You read some Thomas Pynchon or whatever, he does a lot of that kind of jumping around in times.
Yeah,
and
it's
stuff like
true.
that.
Yeah, I read Vineland not too long ago. I'm like, holy shit, he's fucking like he's going all over the place. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think that's one of those things where reading Malazan is easy if you've read outside of the fantasy genre, because he uses a bunch of techniques that are more much more popular and more normal in other genres than like just straight up fantasy. But if all you've ever read is, I don't know, some Joe Abercrombie and Song of Ice and Fire, then you're like, what's going on here?
I guess my point about like the tone, what I'm trying to get at, it's kind of like, imagine like if the first law, you get this world that's pretty grimy for the most part. There is magic, but like, it's pretty grimy for the most part. And then you
Yeah.
kind of get into it, and then like all of a sudden there's like a big like dungeon crawl like type of D&D type of battle. That's kind of how it felt to me, is what I was trying to get at. I'm just like, this is
Why? Because the fire was visible? Because you already went through the prologue or first chapter, where like a bunch of dudes show up and just summon like 7 hounds that murder like a couple of hundred people.
well, that is true. Yeah, it does happen. So,
You know what
I mean,
So,
it just
what's
kind
the
of
difference?
it just kind of
Oh.
took me out a little bit, because I was just kind of like, wait a minute, like it's kind of just this like kind of dark and foreboding kind of atmosphere. We were like, oh shit, like shit's about to go down, and then like maybe it's pacing, I guess was a better word for, I don't know, but it's kind of like, and then they're like, oh, here's Animator Rake, he's just chilling in his castle, and then he's like in Pale, and he's like, I'm bored, let's go somewhere else, and then he just vanishes. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself.
I think the other part there is that this is a military fantasy, and it is much closer to like war fiction than a lot of other things. And if you've read, you've read like stuff like The Things They Carried and things like that, right? Like, so that weird sort of like jumping between weird hilarity, oftentimes like hysterical like levity, and completely senseless violence and overkill. That is just like something that comes from that element of like military fiction, I think.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
The Siege of Pale is, wizards with like magic, and imagine those being, weapons in, say, Vietnam or World War II or anything else of like a massive scale military.
I mean, I know that Erickson, which if he ever watches this, by the way, I mean, he can feel free to comment and tell me I'm wrong. I don't mind that. But I know he has said he likes like Vietnam War stuff. Like he likes the Short Timers, which is better known as Full Metal Jacket, the movie.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So I mean, I got that, and I know, like, I think Glenn Cook was a Vietnam veteran, if I remember correctly.
Yes and no. Like he was a Marine, I think, but I don't think he ever deployed to Vietnam.
Oh, he did? Oh, okay. Well, he said he was like Vietnam on peyote or something like that with one of his books.
That's the Steven Erickson quote for the first Black Company collection, where Steven Erickson calls it Vietnam fiction on peyote, which is, a good way of describing it, I think.
Yeah, it's just I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. It's just kind of like, and then there's moments where like towards the end of the book when the hold on, I'm looking at my actual review here just to remind me of, because I wrote it down like not too long after I read the book. It's the tyrant, the Jaggerit tyrant, I think, like that shows up, and you're like, what the fuck is this? Where did this come from? And again, I may have not been paying attention. I'll grant you that.
Yes,
but
I loved it.
I'm just
What did Krupp say? He's like, gods make perfect victims or something.
Yes.
Pray.
Yeah,
Gods
and they
make
just kind of,
perfect
and then they just
prey.
kind of like, I don't know. They use like some
Aura farm. Krupp aura farms like no one else. He's
pretty much. They basically aura farm the Jaggerit tyrant into like submission, and that's the end of the fucking book. I'm
Krupp
like,
is such an interesting character because he's like super like Falstaffian in that he like he's kind of played for jokes a lot, and then but when he aura farms, it just never gets old. At least for me, I tend to not like aura farming type characters, but when you present this character as like such a comedic, hysteric character, and then when stuff goes down, he's like, no. Gods are the best prey. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, and then I don't know. It's just kind of like.
So I like the introduction of the Jagu Tyrant just because of I'm a Krub hype man, and I thought.
Well, yeah, it's like I think like.
But I do see how it was kind of out of nowhere a little bit. I mean, there was definitely setup for it.
Here's the thing: like they do bring up like something's coming, but I thought it was like the invasion or something, and then they're like, "Oh, here comes this."
There's a scene. There's a scene where when Tadasale confronts Belladon's Skullcrusher on the plane when they kill each other, right? She asks what he has done, and he's like, well, he was in like that Mage City looking at all of those old fragments of Gotha's Folly, which is that massive tome that is also quoted in some of the epitaphs and so forth, right? About a Jughead tyrant, and he explains what the Jughead tyrant is, because Jughead's famously somewhere between, I guess, a anarcho-capitalist or at least libertarian anarchist in a way, because they really don't like any form of government or anything of the sort. It's not just all these loners living in their towns. Like, so what's a tyrant? That doesn't work. And he's like, well, some Jughead become seduced by power and just enslave everyone around them, and that's what happened there. And he tells that whole story and goes, well, he was put down into this tomb, and then Tadasale goes, well, Lauren is going to free that tyrant, and Belladon is like, no, definitely not. They're there to make sure that no one else does free the tyrant, because he has fully, believed the Empire is sort of like propaganda in a lot of ways. So it is set up very clearly what is going to happen at the end of chapter 9 or 10, I guess.
Then I don't know. I guess I'll just put it this way: like a bunch of random weird shit happens. Like Piran and Tattersall didn't get together. Then like Tattersall blows up, and I was like, oh, okay, that sucks. And then later on, some people show up and are like, oh yeah, by the way, that little girl you were randomly talking to like 5 minutes ago, that's Tattersall. And then he just fucks off and he just walks away. And he's like, fuck you. And he's like, what? And then that's it. And I'm like, shit like that happens all over this book. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going on here?
Well, I will say this. In the later books, like, he goes into a lot of lore of the world that predates Gardens by, like, millennia.
Uh-huh.
And when you have, like, the full stuff, that stuff does seem less random and less sporadic. Like, it seems like this stuff was actually laid out. But I could see, looking back, like, just within the first book, it will feel more sporadic than when you have, like, I hate it when people say this, but when you get the whole picture, those elements.
And I generally don't like when people info dump. I hate it, but like I was just kind of like, damn. There were times in this book where I was like, damn. Do I hate it as much as I think I do? Like, I don't know. Like it was weird. There's just and then Krupp and gang will go and like go right off, and then they run into the I'm forgetting who she is. She's like the adjunct. The adjunct. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I thought it was gonna be like a big character because she had like a whole arc thing going, and like, oh, she's gonna fuck some shit up, and then she gets like stabbed like randomly during like the siege, and then she dies, and I'm like, oh, well, that sucks.
But those guys weren't too random. When you get a little bit more context, those guys will seem less random that stabbed her. I promise. I thought the same thing about that, especially the Crimson Guard. I'm like, who are these guys? Where did that come from? And when you read, especially some of the Esselmon books, she'll be like, "Oh, that's who they are."
He's like, "Yeah, they're gonna." I thought she was gonna like fuck some bitches up, and then it's like, nope, she just gets like stabbed during a riot.
But here's the thing, right? What Malazan does is present a high magic setting. Like we have that, when you talk about like low magic to high magic, whatever. I'm not generally like a fan of those kind of, terminologies. But if you accept that there is a setting that has a lot of magic, or equivalent like would be technology, right? Like you have a lot of fucking magic floating around, then that would permeate the entirety of the world, of the universe, like, and that would mean that there is like resurrection, soul shifting, all of that crazy shit going on, because you have that much magic in general.
Yeah.
And a lot of fantasy has like powerful wizards doing like massive spells when you need fireworks, but nothing beyond that. And the Malazan world as a whole is very consistent in that regard, that it has all of this crazy stuff going on at the same time. And I think it feels disorienting because there's not that many sort of like fantasy books that have sort of like that level of consistency, going like, well, this is a magical world, so we're going full throttle on the magic all the fucking time, so deal with that. I found this interesting on a reread today, right? That scene where Quickban hangs out with Hairlock in somewhere in the Chaos Warren, and I wonder, and I'm not someone who reads a lot of like author interviews, so I never know these kind of things, right? That really reminded the description of the Chaos Warren and that kind of stuff. It really reminded me of parts of the Books of Amber by Roger Zelazny, where you have that whole idea of like Amber being sort of like the ultimate sort of like true city, and everything beyond that is sort of like reflections on the Order side, and then you have the Courts of Chaos on the other end, and you have all these other worlds, parallel worlds that are shadows of that. And the further out you get, the more chaotic stuff gets, the more sort of like the rules of physics and so forth are disbanded. There's like a scene, and I think might be the second or third book, and there's so many of them. I mean, there's 10 in all, where there's like rocks floating around and people talking while jumping around because gravity is kind of given up in that specific world. And a lot of the descriptions of chaos in this first novel remind me of those more like chaotic worlds in the Books of Amber by Roger Zelazny in a way.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys watch the AP and Philip conversations about the Malazan saga, whatever you want to call it. I watched their one for Gardens of the Moon because I'm like, well, I don't entirely know what's happening here. Maybe I can watch their video and get a good idea of it. So I did, and there was some stuff that was very helpful. One of the things I really liked that AP pointed out was that the siege at the very beginning of the book, where Sari gets kind of trapped by Dancer and Cotillion, that kind of siege disrupts the narrative, which I actually kind of went back and read it later. I'm like, oh, it kind of does. And I was actually talking with David about it, Four Corners of the Page, for those who don't know who that is. And he was kind of like, oh, I kind of came up with that too. I'll have to mark that down. I thought I found something there. But I thought that was really interesting. But again, I kind of going back to one of the like major problems I had with it is just like there's just stuff like that all over the book where I'm just kind of like, what is going on here? Like I respect the commitment to the bit, but like my head is now starting to hurt thinking about all this stuff. I'm just like, oh my gosh, okay.
The interesting part there is also like you don't have to understand everything, and that's like one of the curses of like modern fantasy, is that people expect the world to be fully explained, and that you as a reader can actually get an explanation and a concrete, definite answer to any possible question that arises within the world that the author describes. And that's the Sanderson curse, right? Like, because Sanderson builds his worlds that way. And if there's a question, he might just jump onto fucking Reddit and tell you the answer, and that's going to be the final answer. And you don't get that with the Malazan Book of the Fallen. There's a lot of stuff that will never be explained in these worlds, and in these books. You don't need to understand those things. Focus on the actual plot, and you'll be fine. Focus on the things that are happening, and go along for the ride, and stuff will make sense in that regard. Also, can we just talk about like how insanely cool the conversations between Lorne and Onas Tulan are? That whole thing about
Lorne's
futility
Crocus's
is so good.
uncle, right? If I remember correctly, I could be mistaken on that. Who was Crocus's uncle? That
is Mahmoud.
Or no, it's not Barrick. It's that I forget his name.
Much.
I was about to say there's a lot of
No,
people.
Lorne is the adjunct, the red-haired lady that gets
right.
killed randomly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, and she's on her way to the tomb, right, with Onos Tulan, the Talanimas undead warrior, and she has that conversation. It's like, what do you think about? And he's like, about futility. It's like, do all Talanimas think about that? It's like, no, why not? Because it's futile, and that is just such a good joke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
no,
like
that.
Yeah, like I mean, again, it's just like there's just like the whole like how do I put this? Like again, I'm trying to think of how to word this. Like there's just it's really random, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And you know, it's funny. I watched another review from a good friend of mine. I won't say his name, but you probably know who I'm talking about. where he compared like gods walking amongst them to something out of a Brandon Sanderson book, and I was like, I don't know, like I've never read Brandon Sanderson, but like the gods like kind of screwing around with people, that reminded me more of like the Odyssey or the Iliad, stuff like that, more than like anything Brandon Sanderson came up with.
Yeah, well, look, gods fucking around with humans is a proud tradition of mythology ever since people started making up stories. That's just like something that we've always had. And with Malazan, you have that. There's definitely, obviously, there's some echoes with the Odyssey and so forth.
So I didn't really mind that so much, is what I was trying to say.
I mean, there's a similar thing going on in the Malazan Book of the Fallen in a way. It becomes clearer in later novels, right? That is similar to the thing that Terry Pratchett sets up in Small Gods. The idea that, like, if what makes you a god is that people worship you, that means the things that people believe about you as a god does impact sort of like your powers and what you can do. The more worshippers you have, the more powerful you are. But if all of your worshippers think that you're a bloodthirsty motherfucker, it becomes very, very difficult for you to not actually act as a bloodthirsty motherfucker, because that's where all your power comes from, that specific belief. So that belief shapes like the nature of a god up to a point. And that's something that I find really interesting, because that's not necessarily something that you see in Greek mythology, but it's certainly something that you can sort of like extract from later ideas in anthropology and philosophy and so forth. And that makes for interest. That kind of ties into that whole idea that gods are the best prey or best victims, because
So, okay, let's move on to the second major thing, and I should note before I pose this question. Before I pose this question, I should note I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm not trying to trick you guys. I'm being absolutely 100% serious here, and you guys can think about it. But another problem I had with this that really just kind of rubbed me the wrong way is, like, who are these characters? Because when I sit down to consume a piece of art, I'm sure it's quite reasonable to expect some things. One of those things, at least when it comes to characters, if you're consuming a narrative, you generally want to get the idea of, okay, who is this character? What do they want? Why do they want it? And why is this important? I had questions about that throughout the entirety of this book. I didn't really get
that's crazy, because I think I have like brought up to other friends how great Erickson is at like characterizing people, even if it's only for like a page or two.
Well, let me finish.
Okay.
And because it's like, let me see an example that you guys would know. Like, think of like Discworld, Samuel Vimes. Who is this person? What does he care about? And why is this important? Well, Sam Vimes, he's the grumpy commander of the City Watch. Well, he was initially a captain. He turns into a commander. Not really a big spoiler. That's in the second book. Anyway,
he cares about boots.
He cares about boots, yes, but what does he also care about? He cares about attaining justice. He may be grumpy and a cynical bastard who thinks everybody is an asshole, but he cares about justice. He really cares about attaining justice. He cares about making the world a fair place. And why is it important? It's a story about fantasy cops, And
one time, I would say that all stories about cops are usually fantasy, but that's,
Yeah, okay, but okay, but that's the thing I'm trying to get at. But when I was reading this, it's like, okay, who is Whiskey Jack? Why does he care about this? Aside from being a soldier, despite the fact that he was, a soldier of this thing that got overthrown, and now he's being put in this situation because of, political chicanery, basically, because, I got some background information. But, like, who is this character? The only person I really felt had that was Paran. Because Paran is, like, he's sent on this mission to infiltrate the bridge burners, but he doesn't feel good about it. He wants to go back to his family. He just wants to live a normal life. He just wants to do that. And, like I'm like, okay, there you go. I understand where this guy's coming from. I understand what this guy's trying to do. I mean, he gets stabbed and comes back to life. But, that's... After a while, you're just kind of like, you're just kind of like, okay, but I'm
I feel
being
like you're
absolutely.
missing. I feel like you're definitely missing a lot of like Paran's motivations as well there.
But then eventually he kind of goes like, I don't feel good about spying on these people, and then he joins them by the end. I'm like, oh, look, an arc is happening here. I see it.
Mhm.
Maybe there's a little roughness here and there, but I can see it, And there's Krupp, but
Right.
I like Krupp. I don't know if like, I just really like Krupp because
I feel like
if they do an
as you continue
adaptation of
through the
Malazan,
series,
if Matt Berry does not play Krupp, just forget it. We're not getting anywhere. That seems like a role made for that guy, But anyway, feel free to tell me I'm wrong. I'm cool with it, But I'm just
I mean,
wondering, like,
you don't know like what Dumbledore's motivations are during the first Harry Potter book. Like you don't know why he's got it out for Voldemort. Like you don't. I feel like where by the end of the Book of the Fallen, I would be hard pressed to find a single character that you don't understand their motivations, you don't understand their worldview, you don't understand what their set mission is, and but you're not going to know that like book one. And I think Whiskey Jack is one of the characters where his past is drip fed to you.
I should
I'd say the same thing.
I should back. I'll let you keep. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you here, but like I do understand this is a book one. By the way, I know this isn't like it's not immediately going to be understood, but like nonetheless, I would have liked more of like a taste, if you will. It was funny because I saw Raf's comment on another review where it's like Whiskey Jack's kind of the most conventional fantasy protagonist, and I'm like, who's like haunted by his regrets. I'm like, I didn't really get the sense of that. I just got the sense that he's like this guy who's, he's a soldier, he's doing his job, he doesn't really care for it, but you know what? What are you gonna do?
he's very Logan Nine Fingers in that regard, right? Like
Kind
he's
of.
been doing this. He's been doing this for the longest fucking time, and right now because he is an officer, his main motivation is keeping his people safe. That's his motivation here. He's the cap, well, he's a sergeant in this regard, and his goal is to keep his squad alive throughout these things, while everyone else, including the fucking empire that he's working for, has it out for him. And that's enough motivation for book one, I think. You know what I mean? Same for Dujek. Dujek wants to keep his army safe and win that fucking battle because he's in charge of that specific campaign. So
that's the high fist, isn't it? Because I will say I really like the term high fist because it just made me think of like a martial arts movie. I love that. I thought that was fantastic.
That's the thing. Is like you have fists and then you have like high fists, and that's like you just military ranks. I mean,
I'm like that's fantastic.
Fine with it. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's just like I don't know. Maybe it's again. I was kind of like, God, do I hate info dumping as much as I think I do? But it was just kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
but I feel like in particular with like a military structure, and this part is military fantasy, right? With a military structure, the motivations are very often the ones that you expect from people in those specific positions. So yeah, the motivation is to do their job and to make sure that all of their people under their command come out alive. And that could keep you very busy for a long time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, it's like what Zach was or what Shaye was saying. He was talking about how like you get to know these characters very intimately. I didn't really get that. It was a lot of like I don't know. It's like who is Tattersail?
Not so much with Whiskey Jack in the first novel. I agree with that.
Like who is Tattersail? Like what does she want? Why does she want it? Why is this important? I'm not saying I expect like a big backstory, but like if you gave like hints.
I feel like we got a ton of Tattersail backstory in book one. Like we know that she was in love with the runner of Mox Hold and that he was killed by the Malazan Empire. Like it's kind of just like mentioned so nonchalantly. And these are events that you see transpire in like Esselmont novels.
Is that part mentioned here? Because I know it's obviously in the second one, Dead House Landing.
But it's in Gardens on my reread because I remember I'm like, oh, so they gave Tattersail a backstory. And whenever I was rereading Gardens of the Moon, I'm like, oh no, they said all this in book one. It's just so casually mentioned.
I just don't remember. I don't remember the bit about the being the lover of Mox Hold. I don't remember that part. It's very clear that she did. So she's part of that mage cadre running amok in the Mouse Quarter, the thing that is happening during the prologue where Whiskey Jack and Paran are looking down on the burning city. She's the person who set that city on fire, right? That is very much clear. And Lorne is one of the people whose family got burnt during that, which is where you have that long
it's
that
like
conversation.
kind of going back
Yeah.
to my question, like who is Lorne? Like what does she want? Like she's ordered to, and as I've watched like
She's the adjunct. She
as I've
doesn't have a
watched
motivation.
interviews, or not interviews, as I watched like Philip and AP's conversation, and that gave me some like pointers. I'm like, oh, okay. But but I'm just again, I'm being real serious here. Like what does she want?
She doesn't want anything. That's the point. She's the adjunct to the Empress. She doesn't have her own will. That's her job. She speaks for the Empress with the voice of the Empress. She wants the things that the Empress wants. And the whole situation in that chapter 9 banquet or dinner or whatever, right, is about her, Lorne the person, wanting revenge or at least justice for what happened when Tattersail and the other mages lost control during that mage hunting expedition. She wants justice for that, but that is Lorne the person who wants that. So her whole motivation, or well, lack of motivation, is about like her job suppressing and keeping her personal motivations out of sight. And what you see throughout the story is sometimes Lorne, the woman, sort of trying to question those kind of things. So
there is a character literally called Tool in the story, right? If I remember correctly.
Well, that's almost Toulon.
Oh, that's Toulon.
That's the undead one.
Oh yeah, no. Speaking of weird random shit happening, like Talk the Younger just gets like smacked, yeeted into another dimension where I'm like, what the fuck's going on here? Like what? But that, sorry, I'm
Look, if you have a multiverse, you might as well play with it.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, it does kind of seem like something like Michael Moorcock would do. Just like, oh, randomly just go away. No, but yeah, it's just like I don't know. It's who are these characters? Like, why should I care about this? Which I suppose might be a bit of a self-absorbed question, but like, I feel like when you're reading a book, you're putting in part of the work of engaging with art. I don't know.
I think
I read this series. I don't know. This was like one of my first fantasy series. This and Realm of the Elderlings. Like prior to Malazan and Realm, I'd only read like Tolkien, Rothfuss, Lynch. So I found in Gardens of the Moon, I like the characterization. At least I felt more of a connection with the characters in Gardens than I did for, say, Eye of the World by far, more than the Blade itself by far. So I guess I'm just like looking at the fantasy averages and like I've gotten kinder on Abercrombie in recent years, but at first I was like, why do I give about like any
That's
of these
interesting.
characters?
That's interesting. We've had opposite reactions here because, like, I feel like the First Law, Abercrombie very quickly tells you what these characters are and what they care about.
See, like I felt like I understood what they wanted, but there was just a cognitive dissonance between what they wanted and how I thought that would even like. I guess I just didn't really like.
I'm not saying like you're wrong or anything. I just find that really interesting, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what's interesting or what's important to understand here is that what a lot of people do in fantasy when writing a character is like reducing a character to like one or two motivations and sort of like basic things, right? And Abercrombie does that with the First Law for sure, because the First Law is in a lot of ways it's a caricature. That's kind of the point, right? That's what he does. He caricatures fantasy. The characters in the Malazan Book of the Fallen are not that kind of character because the Malazan Book of the Fallen, in a sense,
I was going to say I know that Erickson and Abercrombie are different writers. They care about different things, but I'm just saying, I felt there was more efficiency with like an Abercrombie that I didn't really see with Erickson, and that's totally fine. I mean, I imagine Erickson's going for something completely different. I just kind of got frustrated. I just got frustrated here because you're kind of giving some time to these characters. You're like, what the fuck,
Well, that's what I'm trying to say here. The characters in this book don't have like most of those don't have like one singular motivation that defines their character. They're humans that have like 10 things going on. Crocus, like as obnoxiously annoying as he can be. I mean, he's a fucking teenager. He has like 10 or 15 things going on, right? Like on the one hand, he wants to be taken seriously by his adult friends, Murillo, Rallick, and so forth, and is frustrated that they don't actually, let him into their like intrigues and plans. On the other hand, he suddenly gets really horny about that one girl whose room he raided.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Plus-
I remember David was talking about like how weird that is. I didn't really like think of it that much when it first happened. I just kind of thought
I thought he was a creep book
no,
one.
I mean, I was just kind of like, oh yeah, like he's just doing. And then it was later on where I was like, yeah, that was kind of creepy, wasn't it? Like, it wasn't...
Just to be
Here's
clear,
one thing I'll say about Abercrombie versus Erickson in the character department is like, I feel like Glocta in the Blade itself, chapter 1, is the same Glocta at the end of Last Argument of Kings. Like, he's like nicer to one person, and I'm not going to mention who that is, but he gave a shit about one more person than he did in the first book. Whereas, like, in Malazan, like, Crocus Book 1 versus Crocus Book 8 are drastically different. Felt like Logan stayed the same.
Well, that's the point.
Like,
well, hold on. That's
the.
Like, well, hold on. That is kind of the point of the first law, though. To be fair,
I know. I'm just saying. Like, I don't think anybody changes, so I think it's easier to kind of paint a caricature of what the character's supposed to be.
Yeah, definitely. But that's my thing is there that like these characters have like each of them are often torn between like 10 different sort of like things, right? And that makes it harder to sort of like pinpoint their motivations because those motivations shift between scenes. And that can be difficult to, I mean, you have to read them more as characters in, say, a contemporary realist literary fiction oftentimes where characters also have like different motivations depending on who they're talking to and so on. They're not just like one guy who wants to do that one thing.
Well, I it's interesting. I mean, again, I could bring up something like The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. It's like, well, what does Cavalier want? He wants, well, one, he wants to make a good life for himself in America, but also he wants to bring his family to America while also, feeling guilt that he's in America while his family is over in, I forget where they're at. And then, what happened, I won't spoil what happens in Cavalier and Clay, but you understand where Joe is coming from.
It's a historical novel set in the 1940s in America and Europe. What do you think would possibly happen to Jewish family in Europe?
Okay, I got
let's
that.
Let's not spoil the Holocaust.
I don't want to know what happens.
But my point being, like, I understand him. I understand where he's coming from. There are still those like messy emotions, but he has a goal. He has something he wants.
Yeah, but all of these characters have things they want. Like, that's the point. It's like they all have things that, with the possible exception of Onos Tulan, who doesn't want anything because he's thinking about futility.
Like, I mean, with Krupp though, like with Krupp, there was a point where it's like, okay, there is kind of a mystery to this character that like he's far more crafty and like knowledgeable than he lets on, which will be revealed.
Krupp wants is pastries and beer.
Well, he does want pastries and beer, but like I got the sense that like there's more that meets the eye, and that's the point, which I appreciated. Also, Krupp's just fun. I really liked Krupp a lot. Like I probably would have quit the book.
A lot of fun of Malazan is finding out what those characters want as it's unveiled throughout the books. Like you don't know book 1, Blade itself. You don't know what Baez wants. And if you did know what Baez wanted and who he was and why he was the way he was, it would detract a lot of the enjoyment out of it.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
So you kind of have to. I think it makes for a more rewarding experience in hindsight after reading a few of the books. When you know,
I'm not saying there shouldn't be mysteries
and what they wanted. It recontextualizes a lot of the events from book 1 where you didn't necessarily know all of the motivations.
I should say I'm not saying you shouldn't like spoon feed like all the backstory real quick. Like that would just detract from the experience. I've read novels where that's happened, where you're like, oh my god, like okay, I got it, but like I don't know.
Eye of the World.
What'd you say?
I said Eye of the World.
Oh, yeah. Well, I haven't read that, so I don't know. But
The Eye of the World is much better than people claim it is.
I'll
in relation to all the other Wheel of Time books, because it's not worse than any of the others. They're all really bad. Yeah, exactly.
I guess what kind of irritated me so much, it's like there's something I want to latch onto, and I'm just not. And there are like emotional moments that Erickson is trying to do, and I'm just not feeling it. And now I could say it's personal taste. That's totally fine. I'm not trying to say like Erickson is doing. I don't ever want to say someone's doing something objectively wrong because like I feel it's like wrong.
Not to your taste.
Yeah, not to my taste. But it was just kind of like, it's like I understand you're trying to pull for the emotion here, but like. I don't know. It's just like it feels so thin. Like I don't really know where to attach.
One event from Gardens that I know exactly what you're talking about, and I felt the same thing, was like we just kind of got like brief glimpses of the relationship building between Ganois and Tattersail.
Yeah.
And then when she dies, he's like, "No, I loved her." And that was one moment from Gardens where I was like, I didn't really buy their relationship yet. So that emotional beat just didn't hit.
That's partly. I think that's partly because Ganos is really young, and it's important to keep in mind he's like maybe 20, and that is made clear. Like that.
Well, that was one part I liked.
Time where we
when
where we see how they are, where they basically hook up for the first time, right? And Tattersail even thinks about how naive and sort of innocent the whole thing feels, and she's like 200 fucking years old, or over 200 years old, and he's like 20 maybe or 18. And like, Britain, how would you feel if someone that you have like hooked up with a couple of times just gets murdered?
It probably wouldn't feel good, I'll admit. I would probably be sad.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. I'm not saying it's unrealistic. I'm just kind of going like, what? Like I don't know if the emotion that Erickson wants me to feel is what I'm feeling here, which again is totally personal taste, and like that's great. But I was just kind of like,
need to see this as the greatest love story of all time. What you need to understand is, however, that it is personally devastating to Ganos Paran at that point.
My issue isn't that I didn't buy that Ganos would feel this. It's just how much of the relationship was shown to us, the reader. It's hard for you as an observer to care.
But I do.
I buy it. I buy the emotions. I just am like, I was not attached to y'all as a couple, and I don't think Erickson was trying to attach us to them as a couple.
No,
but the way the scene was written, it felt very dramatic, and at that point, I was like, you knew her for like 10 seconds.
Now, I do like how with Tattersail, she kind of shows Perron a different perspective, and I'm like, yes, more of that. And I do like that, but again, it was just like the rest of it.
I do like the fat lady with the spells.
Yes. Though you could meme it a little bit and go like, oh, he had sex with a lady, and he's like, oh, I'm redeemed now. And you're like, what? Nah, I don't think that was what he was going for.
I don't think redemption is the point there.
No, I don't think so either. But I've heard some people joke about that. I'm like, yeah, I can see where those jokes would come from.
And also, so I'll say this: in Memories of Ice, there is a conversation where like Perrin even comments on how he felt during the scene where Tattersail perished. And he's like, yeah, I thought I was in love, but like I was just a young kid. So like even Erickson's aware of those moments. But when I was reading Gardens, I'm like, oh, this is not hitting how he wants it to. But then in a later book, and maybe it was just him covering his ass, we'll never know, but he definitely like called it into question where I'm like, oh, was I not supposed to feel it? Because he kind of makes Perrin look melodramatic in the rear view.
But that makes sense if you go back to what you said earlier, that like there's a parallel between Perrin and Crocus. And Crocus is also overly melodramatic, right?
Yeah, I just thought Crocus was annoying. I was just like, go away.
Yeah. I said earlier, I'm like, I didn't like either of them, but my opinion on Perrin changed. Yeah.
I feel like
I like Crocus more by the end than in the first book, but he's far from my favorite.
And then he like changes with sorry, and I'm just like, you poor bastard. You don't.
I think the problem with Crocus, or why so many people find Crocus annoying, in particular, men find Crocus annoying, is that deep in our hearts, most of us know that at age 15 or 16, we were very similar to Crocus in a lot of ways.
I had a feeling you were going to say that, because I was feeling the same way. I'm like, yeah, that guy reminds me a lot of myself when I was like 16, especially in hindsight. But
it's like, is he annoying? Yes, because I was annoying at that age. So he's a very well-written character. He's a very good depiction of a 15-year-old boy, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's again, I guess Crocus is also, a good example where it's like what he wants is pretty simple. But aside from that, I was just kind of like, I don't know. Like, what does Hairlock want? I mean, aside from being like a fucking weirdo puppet guy who like
He wants to find out who is assassinating the mages, but then
one of
he has
my
bird in
favorite
his
moments
brain.
is when like I forget exactly the point, but some of the wizards are walking around and then they're like, "Oh shit!" And then they look over and here comes Hairlock the puppet, and he just starts he just throws down, and I'm like, "That's great." I don't know
Well,
if
I
that
mean,
was
the thing with
intended to be melodramatic, but this is super melodramatic, and I love it.
I think the issue with Hairlock is that Hairlock is a veteran with like all the psychic damage that being like a mage in a war for like in a military for like decades can do, and he has a lot of paranoia already, and he gets killed, and his paranoia is absolutely justified in that regard because we know who killed him. And Amanda Rake who killed him, right? So you have all of that stuff, and he then gets a chance to pick up and find out what actually is going on, and sort of like satisfy his paranoia. And the way he can do that is by fucking around with chaos, and chaos magic is like taking drugs in a lot of ways. So the more he uses that power, the crazier he gets. It's like Elon Musk taking some ketamine and then taking more and more and more and more and going wherever it is that Elon Musk is these days. You know what I mean? It's You have to see like using chaos magic as a form of addiction, and that's why Hairlock, not the most stable person to begin with, becomes absolutely fucking insane at the end of the of his arc. That's why you don't look for his motivation at that point.
Yeah, or like I mean, with Animator Rake, I don't think we're supposed to know what his or I think we get a little bit of what his motivation is, but anyway, you get the sense that he's kind of like this.
He's a 300,000-year-old dude. You will not understand his motivations.
Yeah, I know. My point being, like, there's like again, kind of like with Krupp, there's like this mystery to him, and I think I'm like, oh, okay, so we'll probably learn more about him as the series goes on.
You're saying with the way, like, for instance, Whiskey Jack is presented in the first book, you didn't feel a feeling of mystery. You just felt like stuff was missing.
Yeah, no, there were so many people who were like, yo, Whiskey Jack is based as fuck, and like he's great. And I'm like, oh man, I'm looking forward to this Whiskey Jack guy.
Goes hard. That's my dog.
And then he's just like,
I love Whiskey Jack.
And then he's just like, and then it's just like he shows up and he's like a guy, which is fine. Yeah. Like he can be a guy, but like,
I'll say, like, my favorite character in the whole series is Fiddler, and in book 1, you get nothing out of him.
Yeah, I was about to say, no, Fiddler's just chilling, bro. Like he's just doing his thing over.
Oh my gosh, he's the best character in the whole series. You don't even know.
Like again, it's like even with guys like Quickben, like who is Quickben? What does he want?
Oh, that's a whole can of worms. That's not missing. That's something that when you find out, your jaw will be on the floor. That character specifically.
No. That's
even then, when you read Carcanus, you're going to have questions like, did I even know? And that's for multiple characters.
That's when it's like, the question, like, who is Quickben is one of those questions that is not yet definitely answered.
That would be like asking.
You are not alone with that question.
Oh, yeah, well, okay, you know what, fine. Like I said, like, it's totally fine to have a bit of mystery. Like, this is a series. There are going to be mysteries that you want to see solved throughout the series. I'm fine with that. I'm just kind of, again, they're just, like what Shay was saying. It kind of felt like there were some things that were missing. And you're just kind of like,
there's scenes in Stephen Erickson's new novel, latest novel, No Life Forsaken, where you're like, damn, is this Quickben? And I'm pretty sure it is. But, this stuff is, like, Quickben is going to remain a mystery in a lot of ways. And there is a theory, and I assume we talk about the same person in Carcanus, where everyone kind of assumes that is going to be Quickben. But do we know? No, we don't. Like, not knowing who Quickben is what most of Malazan is about.
are very similar for it to have been nothing. But there's a lot of theories about how they correlate.
Hold on, I'm trying to look for some of these other characters. I can't think of their names because it's like fucking 10. There's like 30 or 40 of them in this book. Hold on here. Let me see. Well, I mean, Sorry's possessed, so I'll give her a pass on like motivation.
she becomes a very different character from the end, like when her
Though,
possession
another
ends.
kind of funny anecdote from the Philip
Mhm.
and AP chat. They're like, "Oh, that crazy old lady at the beginning of the story? Well,
Yeah.
actually, she was possessing Sorry first." And I'm like, "How
Yes.
in the hell did I miss that?" I was like,
Well,
"Damn it!"
Yeah, and
they spell that out like later in the series. They
I
explain
don't
it, but
know.
I missed that on first read.
on the second read, it
They
is
were not kidding,
incredible.
man.
It
The
is
fridge
very,
in
very,
this,
it is
the fridge
very,
logic
very
in this
explicit.
series is ridiculous.
It is very explicit in the text, but yes, you'll miss it the first time around. But I just reread it this morning, and yes, it is very, very explicit. She says the whole thing's like, "I got you first," and she even talks about the whole thing that you will meet the exact wording. I don't know, but like the Lord will, remove that from you with His own hand, but He won't even know. Which is the whole like thing when uh, Anomander Rake forces when they're on the plane, and he goes like, take the rope out of wherever he is, and that's when like Cotillion Dancer has to leave. Sorry, like to stop possessing her, which is happening at that moment where
Or yeah,
Paran
like
and Anomander confronts Shadow Throne, and all of that is in that short sort of like weird "I possessed you" slash prophecy thing that Rika the wax witch does in that first thing. It's all in there, but you only notice on a reread because you don't think in those levels when you're reading it for the first time. You just creepy old woman says creepy old woman shit, and
yeah,
then
that was kind of
oh
what I
wait.
was at. I'm like, yeah, this lady's kind of crazy, and she's just kind of doing a thing over
I mean, to
here.
be fair, it does show up in Path to Ascendancy as well.
Oh yeah, there's also I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but apparently people can become gods in this, and it's called
Yes.
ascendancy,
Yes.
which is kind of just. I mean, I don't know if it's really brought up that much in this book, really,
No.
but um,
Well, I mean, it's kind of implicit if, as we already hinted, and as a spoiler, the Emperor and Dancer, his best friend, are now Shadow Throne and Cotillion, and Shadow Throne and Cotillion are gods.
mhm. Even
You
though they
know,
were
clearly
assassinated,
people can become gods.
even though they were assassinated. Okay, but anyway, it's or
Well, or were they?
uh
Question mark.
yeah, no,
There's a
it's.
book about that. It's called Knight of Knives.
Hold on, I'm trying to find some of these other characters. I can go like, who the hell are these characters? But I can't find any. Maybe Rallick. Rallick was a big character, wasn't he? He was like Krupp's friend.
Ralik Nom is just like a badass assassin who really hates using magic, which is why he uses like superior firepower most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
There's even that scene when he kills that first councilman, and someone's like, killed with a poison quarrel. Who's doing that when like the Assassin's Guild in the Dawn has like magic all the way? And it's like, oh well, Ralik doesn't because he hates magic. No,
Um,
he's just a beefy assassin who likes killing people and is really good at it.
fair enough. But um, yeah, that's. I'll get to. We're at an hour and a half, and I don't want to go on forever
Yeah.
because I'm trying to be respectful of you guys' time. But I did want to bring this up real quick before we get off here. But a lot of people also in Malazan talk about the themes. I'm a big theme guy, believe it or not. You might have noticed if you watch my videos.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that I noticed that like there's a emphasis on like compassion is what they say in this series. Now this is the first book, so I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. It's probably not like blatantly apparent in the first book. We got 10 whole books, we got 9 whole books to go. But what would you guys say is like the thematic core of this book specifically?
That's a good one. That's one to chew on.
Because that was one I was kind of also curious about. Because I was like, okay, like there's some stuff going on here. I mean, with Paran, there's like themes of like duty and identity and
I feel like duty and identity is definitely a big one because a lot of people are struggling with that. Like Lauren is like the
identity,
most
particularly
explicit.
like Sorry is possessed and like she's such a hardcore killer, and everyone else is creeped out by her, which I always think is also pretty hilarious. But anyway, sorry, Raph, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, I feel like duty and identity in general is like a lot. a large one in this one. You know, you have a lot of people trying to find their identity, assert their identity. Crocus is, wants to find his identity, want to find out who he wants to be. You have people like Lauren who is trying to figure out, or if she can be who she wants to be versus who she has to be. The same way that you have that with like Tok the Younger, who is a claw but also a soldier, and it's clearly more a soldier than a claw. Claw being, the secret, the spying service, basically. You have the same thing with Paran, who is a nobleman but doesn't want to be a nobleman, wants to be an actual soldier and not just like get his jobs because of his he doesn't want to be a nepo baby, is what it is about, right? Like he wants to actually achieve stuff by being good at soldiering and shit. Like, so you have those things going on. Same with, as I said, like with these different characters in the Phoenix Inn, with obviously Crocus. You have Cole, who basically lost his identity and is regaining his identity in one way or another. So identity.
You see, like Lorne, who like has no identity at all, aside from being like what you were saying earlier, the adjunct to the Empress.
Well, I mean, that's why that dinner scene is such a key scene in the entire novel, because you have that whole thing, right? Tatersail walks in and Lorne, the person, comes out and confronts her, and Tatersail accepts that and goes like, well, then just kill me. Basically, the first, like, execute me, and then Dujek says like, yeah, you can't do that, because if we execute people for war crimes, we'd have a big problem in this man's army. This woman's army. And then Tatersail goes like, well, in that case, let's just have a duel about it. I'll use my magic and you use your magic killing sword, which is, the same thing at the end of the day. And then people go like, well, no, you can't have that either, because you're the adjunct. You don't actually get to be Lorne the person. And that's when Lorne basically kills her own sort of personality again, with even explicitly the sentence like, he had witnessed an execution and it was not Tatersail's. And that's the point. It's like someone's free will has just been completely abolished by duty and stuff like that. And we can, debate whether that's a good thing. And,
Fair enough. Shaye, do you have any thoughts on this, or are you just kind of like, I don't know? Sorry. Go on.
I think probably, I mean, yeah, the themes of duty are a big one, and I think the one, I guess, that we haven't talked about yet that stuck out to me a lot from Gardens was the bridge burners, and like they had their duty to the Emperor, to the Malazan Empire as a whole.
Yeah.
And they're kind of stripped of that duty, and they're not, they're part of the old guard, and it's very obvious to them that the Empress not only doesn't need them, but doesn't want them around. So it's like, what are they fighting for with that stripped away? So
yeah, I mean, that definitely is a big one. That whole question is like, if you are loyal to the state, what do you do when the current people in charge do things that seem to be in conflict with that loyalty in one way or another? It's like,
it's very timely, unfortunately.
I was going to say that it's not exactly a topic that is, that far removed from reality right now.
I was going to say, that's very timely.
Yeah. Do you have to follow illegal orders? Yes or no? And I guess we can all be happy that Donald Trump does not have the claw to send those, or a high mage like Taishan to actually fuck with you if you don't do the thing he wants.
No, he just has an army of incels and ski masks.
Yeah, just a bunch of
as dangerous as claw assassins.
Bunch of Redditors.
just not as competent, I think.
Yeah. But an incompetent.
One thing I found really interesting, though,
more dangerous.
One thing that I found really interesting on a reread, because the first time I read it, I really hated Taishan. I really hated Taishan. And then I read, more Malazan Book of the Fall, and then I, in particular, read the novels of the Malazan Empire, and, of course, the Path to Ascendancy, and I'm like, I feel I have a very different opinion on Taishan nowadays. Mm-hmm. And you read him again after having read all that other stuff, and you're like, that was in there. And the fact I didn't pick up on it, the fact that he's really happy that Lorne comes and takes over, because he really sucks at all the social stuff, because he is for all intents and purposes, definitely an autistic person, right? Like, he's really good at magic, but he doesn't understand human motivations at all, and he doesn't get it, and he's like fucking up massively. And when Lauren
I
goes like, "No,
definitely
stop,"
see what you're talking about with hints
yeah,
of it. I did random thought. I do
mhm.
think a lot of people like to say that like Erickson gets the Malazan characters better than Esselmont. And I think that's kind of
No,
unfair to Esselmont. I actually like Esselmont more than I think common consensus, but I think he writes Tayshiren the best.
he does
I
write Tayshiren the best, and he does a very good job with
the Crimson
Surly
Guard.
slash Lacine as well. Like the Empress
Oh,
of
he does do
Tayshiren, very
Lacine
much,
very well.
yeah. I mean, he also, to be fair, he does have like a lot more page time with them than does Erickson. So there's that. But yeah, no, that's the thing. Is like each of them have like strengths with different characters.
My one
And
big pet peeve with Esselmont is the fact that some characters were Nippon in novels of the Malazan Empire, and then they were white in the in the Path to Ascendancy. I was like, wait, weren't you blue in the other books? That's like a
I
few
don't
things.
remember whether I don't necessarily
There's two
remember what.
characters that were definitely blue in novels, Shimmer and Blues, but then they're not
No,
blue.
no,
They're
no, no.
not
Shimmer is Itko Kan, right? She's Canese.
I'd have to reread. But I know for sure Blues was Nippon. For sure.
I
But
mean, he's called Blues. That makes a lot of sense.
I know, but in what was it? It was either Deadhouse Landing or Kellenved's Reach, where he
Yeah,
was,
no, there he is not. But that's the one where he wants to really join the Crimson Guard, and yeah,
but they completely changed his race in
yeah.
between the two series. That's one of the things that like bugs me. One of the Malazan inconsistencies. Most ones that fans bring up, I'm like, no, I can see it. That's the one where I'm like, hey, guy went from blue to not blue. I can't even argue that one.
I think it's more one of those things where like they have like different notes from their games back then, and Ericsson usually says that Esselman has the correct notes, so maybe Ericsson fucked it up. Who knows?
Well, moving on from there, I mean, there is the ending. The Jackhoot. I'm so sorry, I'm mispronouncing this likely. Jackhoot
Jackhoot, yeah.
It is defeated by Krupp. Krupp does some
He's one of the coolest guys ever.
magic.
I
Yeah,
love him
no,
so much.
Krupp is great. I should just say I
No, I
fuck
meant
with
Race.
Krupp.
I meant Race the Tyrant.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about Krupp. I'm like, yo, Krupp is great. I simp for
Krupp is
that
great
man.
as well, but Race the Tyrant is really good. Also, he loves cats.
A lot of fantasy authors like cats for some reason. Like Neil Gaiman likes cats.
I was going to say a lot of tyrants like cats, I guess.
Anyway, yeah, we're at the end of the
January and
book.
Robin Hobb also love cats.
Yeah.
Crocus, and Sorry get together. Well, I don't know if they're like not like together, but they link up and are like, oh, let's go on an adventure or something like that. The bridge burners if I remember right, they botched their plan to like blow up the Turkestan.
Well, to be clear, it's a very good thing they decide not to do it. And that's a really interesting one because it's also one of those setups that is made very clear very early on when you have that short description of like the city watch, the watch people in the Rajasthan who have to make sure that the city doesn't explode because it's called the City of Blue Fire because they have natural gas in caverns underneath the city, which is powering the gas lamps. And if you blow up, the gas pipelines underneath the city by accident because you don't think about that stuff because you just blow up the pavement, you blow up the entire city. So the fact that they decide not to do that is key because otherwise all of the Rajasthan gets destroyed.
Yeah, I was about to say either they botch it or they just decide not to do it. They decide not to do it.
No, they realize that it would in fact actually, destroy the entire city, which is interesting because at the beginning they get the orders to only blow up the city gates, and Whiskey Jack on his own orders decides to not do that because that would be suicidal and instead blow up some road crossings in the city, which would in fact destroy the entire city and be even more suicidal.
But basically what I'm trying to get at here is that the book ends with some question marks. And then after that, apparently we go to an entirely different continent. Yay! Deadhouse Gates.
Well, I mean,
now,
to be fair, What
Okay.
happens in Deadhouse Gates is that you follow the group with Fiddler, Kalam, Crocus, and what's her face?
Oh, that's right.
Sorry,
Yeah, I think
who
doesn't
want to,
doesn't Mahmood
they want
die? If I remember
hmm?
correctly, doesn't he die?
What?
Doesn't Crocus's uncle die?
Yes, Mahmoud dies,
Yes.
and Crocus decides to help the others to bring Sorry back home to her family, to her father.
That's right. Yes. We'll figure out
And
how.
Fiddler and Kalam will go on that group as well. So Deadhouse Gates will follow that group of characters and some new ones, whereas everyone else hangs out with Dujak's now officially outlawed army that starts a pact with an alliance with all the other people like Anomander Rake and Caladan Brood and those resistance people, because they have to go and fuck up the Panyan Domain, which definitely is in need of some good fucking up.
Yes, but I mean, there is a lot that I did not bring up, such as Krupp casually gaslighting his friends. That's always fun.
Well, it is the Rujistan. It is the city of gaslighting.
Oh, that's good.
There's the whole assassins duel in this. Like, again, a lot happens in this book. But we will have to save that for another time because, again, I don't want to hold you guys for too much longer.
Turns out summoning demons is
a terrible way to cut off right there. You said is, and then it cut off, and you stopped there. What were you saying? Summoning demons? Probably a bad idea would be my guess, but...
Yeah.
He just gave a whole explanation. He's like, so what you need to do to summon demons, and it's all frozen.
Just froze,
the whole time.
But now I will say I do hope to read Deadhouse Gates. I don't know when I'll do that, but when I do that, I don't know, guys. We may have to convene once again, and maybe we'll have Dr. Chase next time because kind of sad he couldn't make
better
it.
have higher than a 5 out of 10. I want at least a 7.
I'll be like, that part of the book where it got really dark. That was really moving. But yeah, I don't know. But yeah, Gardens of the Moon, though. It was a book that was written.
Yeah.
I had some opinions, and I was counterbalanced by two guys who really like Malazan. But yeah, this is my first excursion into Malazan. So, don't be intimidated, guys. It's not like that hard to follow in terms of coherency, but there are a lot of characters. There are even some characters whose names correlate. So that'll throw you off a little bit. But aside from that, you can follow it. It's fine. Don't be scared. But you will probably be confused at times. So there you go. I probably butchered that. And there's a lot of characters, a lot of things going down. But yes, it was a book one, is what I'll say. Oh yeah, there's the other thing I was going to bring up that I forgot to. It's like, what even is the main plot of this fucking series? Like, we don't even know. And then some friends of mine were like, yo, you don't figure that out till book 3. I'm like, damn it, Fuck. But yeah, anyway, enough of that.
Yeah, stuff going on. Until then, it's just, war crimes.
Yeah, pretty much. But yes, it's Gardens of the Moon. Deadhouse Gates. I'll get to it. I am thinking of reading like Rejoice: A Knife to the Heart since I'm going to be reading a lot of sci-fi this year. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. What happens there? We'll say.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I haven't read that one yet. That's his First Contact novel.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. I like it. But it is different. It's very different. Mm-hmm. In that it's much closer to something like Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future than the kind of novels that you usually get. So it's more on like theory and not necessarily theory, but like more like a program of like shit we need to change than a gripping plot about characters having like really important things to do. It's more like a mosaic of like different people in different parts of the world having to live with all the stuff that's going wrong right now, and then doing other stuff in a situation where suddenly maybe the rigid structures of capitalism and so forth and resource scarcity are taken away for a moment. So what would happen then? And could humans maybe be, cool? instead of child soldiers and resource extraction and stuff like that.
Very fun, heartwarming material, I imagine. But anyway,
Well,
that sounded really bad. I'm sorry, guys. Like, I'm just.
the Malazan Book of the Fallen is at its core a story about empathy, compassion, and hope, and a very, very firm belief in human nature and that we can, in fact, be good people.
Yeah, but I guess that's
Here,
my
here.
discussion / me waving my hands, John Minton style, going, "What the hell is this?" For almost 2 hours. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed hanging out with you guys for a little bit. Thank you guys for being patient with me while I was trying to set this up. Because let me tell you, man, there were some times I was like, "Oh my god, when am I going to get these guys together for this?" But yes, it's Gardens of the Moon. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully, I didn't make
Oh, and if
too
you
many
wonder,
people
if you
upset.
wonder whether there are in fact gardens on the moon,
Well, there
you
were
have to
gardens
read.
in this.
There's gardens in the moon. If you read Orbs Up the Throne, you'll learn all about the gardens of the moon.
Oh yeah, I guess I didn't bring that up. Anyway,
They actually do mention the phrase. They do say the Gardens of the Moon, and it felt
Yeah.
very.
Oh,
When I
yeah.
read that, it felt very like look at the camera, like
Hey, yeah.
we're the Guardians of the Galaxy. What are we, some Guardians of the Galaxy or something? It felt like
yeah.
that.
Like, what are we, some Suicide Squad? It's probably like the most egregious version of that. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, but yeah. So this is my first step in the Malazan journey. Did I get it the first time? Definitely not. But this is probably what I'm gonna have to read again at some point. I would like to get to Dead House Gates though, because people are like it's better. So
Look,
hopefully I didn't
there's cool
offend.
dogs in that one.
I was about to say, well, I hopefully didn't offend a lot of people with this, and hopefully I won't get any angry comments saying that I'm wrong and that I'm gay and I should stop posting videos on YouTube. But I'm glad to have shared it with you two. So thank you. Thank you for your patience with
inviting
me.
us on.
So I'm just gonna go from order here, as I like to do before the end of these. Shaye, if you have any social media, feel free to share it.
I have a channel called Zachary Shaye, and that's what I got. It's on YouTube. It's
Fair
just
enough.
my name.
Fair enough. Raf, how about you?
I have a channel called Raf Blutaxt where I usually get mad at capitalism. I sometimes also talk about science fiction and fantasy, and just released a video called Abraham Lincoln Axe Murderer.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm like, I'll have to check that out. Anyway, well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and well, until the next time we do this, I'll probably have Shaye and Raf on for other things, so you'll see them again. Well, until next time,
Yes.
see you guys later.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.